Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crossing the LD, a show completely focused on veterans transitioning from military to civilian life. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments, a nonprofit on a mission to strengthen mental fitness for all. Go check them out at pivotalmoments.org to learn more. I'm Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen, and we are privileged today to have Becky Margiotta with us. Becky served as a signal officer from 1991 to 2000 in the U.S. Army, where she held various company-grade officer positions that included platoon leader, battalion adjutant, company commander, and detachment commander. And after separating from the military, Becky briefly spent some time as a stockbroker before diving into what would become an incredible philanthropic journey that spanned several organizations, which included her serving as the Director of Innovations with Breaking Ground and the Director of the 100,000 Homes campaign. Both of those organizations have a shared mission to create housing for the underserved, among other initiatives. She's the co-founder of the Social Change Agency, which provided retreat facilitation and leadership coaching designed to enable social change leaders to have more impact. And from 2014 until now, she has served as the principal and owner of the Billions Institute, whose mission it is to help leaders scale solutions to the world's biggest problems at record-breaking speeds. She is the definition of a trailblazer to Howie and I, and she's been interviewed by Anderson Cooper for 60 Minutes, and now she's here with us. Becky, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lee, thanks for having me. Howie, good to see you. Real honor to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah, the pleasure's ours. So diving right into the first question, Becky, you have a very unique and fascinating resume that starts with military service. And as a West Point graduate and highly successful Army signal officer, how has your time working in the military shaped you and helped you becoming successful, since you transitioned from the Army in 2000?
Lee, it's such a good question, and it's difficult to distill 13 years into a pithy response. But I have a couple.
We only give you
that.
60 seconds for this response. Now, take as much time as you want.
let me get that out. And not only that, not only 13 years, but 13 years in the formative years of your life. 13 years of I guess I was like 18 to 30, right? And so 17 to 30. So from the very first day at West Point, it was inexplicably to me at the time. I was imbued with the weight of responsibility of life or death decisions, and literally, I'll tell you that if my toothbrush and my toothpaste were facing the wrong way in the medicine cabinet, it wasn't that I wasn't following orders or I didn't have good attention to detail. It was that I didn't have good attention to detail, and that's going to get somebody killed. And
wow, as
an 18-year-old, I was like, wow, that's kind of intense about some toothpaste, but that's part of the whole indoctrination. And especially as in the training to become an officer, your decisions and your choices and your actions could potentially have life or death consequences for other people. And that weightiness doesn't go away, even though now my decisions don't as clearly have life or death consequences, right? There's just at a very young age, an awareness of the importance of taking responsibility. So that's one. If you want to jump in,
right.
I think the other one that's just unequivocally came from the military, the experiences I had was a toughening up in some ways of mental, physical, and emotional perseverance, and I never quit. And
right.
I mean, I played soccer before. I had endurance, but the experiences that I had in the military really dialed in for me. Once I'm committed to something, I'll never quit. And the gist of it, everyone who served in the military knows: mission first, soldiers always, troops always. And it's just that got put in my DNA, and it's so relevant in the civilian world. Yeah.
Well, hey, Becky, I just want to share with the audience that I had the absolute, and I do mean absolute privilege and honor to have served with you two different times throughout my military career. One, when I was commanding the 112 Signal Battalion. You started as the battalion adjutant, or S1, so you sat right outside my office, was where I got to get to know you and get to really appreciate what you had to offer as a leader, as a soldier, and more importantly, just as a person, which is why I selected you to be the commander of Bravo Company, which happened to be the company I commanded years before that in the 112th. And then when I left the battalion to go on to another 05 level command, and as we were hunting for quality signal officers, quality communicators to work in a very unique special operations environment, one of the first folks that came to my mind that we should recruit and put through our selection and assessment process was you. And I watched a number of people go through that process and not make it. And it's not because they weren't exceptional people. It's, the term I typically describe it as, we were looking for a high-performing Dalmatian with 100 spots, and you could be a high-performing Dalmatian with 99 spots or 101 spots, but that wasn't the right Dalmatian. We were looking for one with 100 spots, and that was you. You successfully made it through the selection assessment process and then thrived as a detachment commander in this very unique environment, and which continued to build my personal esteem for you as an officer, as a leader, and again as a person. You chose to leave the military after about 9 years of service, and one thing that might be helpful for our audience to understand is why you chose to move on from the military, and more importantly, how you prepared yourself for the transition into the civilian world. I think that would be helpful. And then what I'd also like you to share is, if looking back on what you know now, if you had it to do over again, is there anything you would have done differently to prepare or execute your transition, given the experience that you've gained over the years? Because I think where our audience can really benefit is the kind of transition advice someone like you can provide to them to help them successfully move into some form of civilian employment.
Those are all great questions, and I'll tell you, the honor was all mine to get to serve with you, Howie, and even getting to command Bravo Company, I knew it was really special because it was the company that you had commanded as well. There's a proud lineage that real honor to be a part of. We'll be proud of that for the rest of my life. So in terms of my decision to get out of the Army, I'll take you to a moment that you were at, Howie, but you didn't know what was going on in the inside for me, but it was the job interview for that second command, or for that second unit. And it was about 15 people or so interviewing me. And one of the questions was something along the lines was, what was my greatest failure? It's a pretty typical interview question. And instantly what came through to me on the other side of that interview was how disappointed my dad was when I came out as gay. And so that was the answer, and I was exhausted. I was exhausted as a human being and had very little, I think, emotional filter or whatever. And I remember just getting emotional and crying and being like, oh, Jesus, now I'm crying in a job interview, just really feeling awful about the whole situation and really kind of just emotionally raw and broke down. And I knew, because of in the military, weren't allowed to be out as gay, that I couldn't tell the truth with these people who I had no other reason not to tell the truth to. It's like, of course, me also feeling in a situation where I couldn't just say, well, this is my answer. I feel like that would have actually been a perfectly acceptable answer, but for that one policy. And so that really haunted me, not being able to tell the truth in that moment. I'm not saying that's like why I quit or anything, but like that type of experience is emblematic of the kinds of experience I feel like I had. Meanwhile, while I was in that interview, I didn't have any access to the news or the media or anything, but it was the same month that Matthew Shepard had been murdered in Wyoming for being gay. As I came out, I learned about that, and I was like, this is not okay. There's people are killing gay people. And a couple months later, or I think a couple years later, Barry Winchell was murdered on Fort Campbell for having, I think his significant other was a trans woman. And I just looked around and I was like, I can't not tell the truth about this. And the straw that broke the camel's back was I went to the Studio Theater in D.C. to see a one-act play called Another American Asking and Telling one night while I was in that second command. And it was one person who did a one-act play of Matthew Shepard's mom and Barry Winchell's mom. And the next day I went in and I turned in my paperwork. I was like, I just can't lie about this anymore because my lying is complicit with other people's murder. And so I know that's probably grandiose, but I was just unwilling to do that anymore. I did not really have a plan B. I was thoroughly ill prepared. I knew nothing since I had been out of high school other than the military way of life, and had no preparation whatsoever. I think at one point I had read the 100 Best Places to Work, and I was like, oh, maybe Patagonia would hire me. But oddly, now I'm friends with the CEO of Patagonia, Rose Mercurio, although I have no confidence whatsoever that she would hire me at this point. I had a really difficult transition to civilian life that I think involved a mild depression, some career floundering, you had asked if there's anything that I could offer to others. If I had a do-over, what would I do differently in that? And it took a couple years, honestly, but I think what I would recommend to any veteran transitioning, one would be to hold on to your sense of selfless service like it's a life raft. Like it's a life preserver. Like do not let go of whatever sense of selfless service you have, and allow that to guide your subsequent career choices. The second piece of advice I have is to don't lowball yourself in any way. That veterans are desperately needed in the civilian workforce. That the qualities and character that veterans have are tremendously of value and of service, regardless of what you did. I promise you there's a need for that. So you can do anything. And my parents always told me that growing up too, like, Becky, you can do anything. I think at this point, I probably couldn't be the first nun in space. But like, other than that, I think most things are still on the table. And so you could do just about any. I had a sister that wanted to be the first nun in space. And then the last thing I would share is get linked up with other veteran organizations and start that even now. And so when I worked on homelessness, I got involved with this Got Your Six collaborative. And through that, I met Team Rubicon and The Mission Continues and Red, White, and Blue. And the people I worked with on Got Your Six, Chris Marvin continues to be involved with Moms Demand Action. There's this whole group of veterans working to with this idea that a lot of the gun violence we see is because civilians don't have anywhere near of the training with weapons that military people do. It's irresponsible. And so there's just tons of camaraderie that you can continue and find ways of being service with these just stellar veterans organizations that have really inspired me, that I want everyone to know about too.
Becky, in a minute, Howie and I are going to dive into kind of the work you've done since, but I want to comment on a couple things. One is that you had kind of joked that you hope that doesn't sound grandiose before. It sounds brave to me. That's the only word that pops in my head. The other thing I want to comment on is, we've done multiple episodes on this, and for the listening audience, this is now the fourth time in a row, we've heard about the transition and to trust your training, right? To trust the mission first attitude, that you're bringing something to the table that, organizations often don't see, and you shouldn't be shy about talking about that, right? And everybody we've talked about in their transition, from my wife to you, it's very similar. I didn't know that I could trust that process, right? The other thing, as you said, is the selfless service. Every person I've known in the military, whether they're in or out, that has held on to that is in some way successful, right? And they have an understanding. And again, from a civilian point of view, I remember I was talking with a combat controller one time, and I found this to be very unique. I had asked him, what is it like when you come back to the States and, for lack of a better word, people really could care less about what you've been doing, right, to keep us safe. And he said the greatest thing I think I'd ever heard, and it really defined selflessness to me, but it also impacted how I approach my work, whether it's in sports or business. He said, I'm doing it so they don't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very impactful moment for me. I was like, man, that is selfless service. He's not doing it for recognition. And not that I think he should have been. And I still like to recognize military whenever we can, obviously. But man, that attitude is an asset, a complete asset to any company that's willing to understand how powerful it is. And I just wanted to reiterate that for the audience, because I think a lot of people transitioning don't realize how big of an asset that is. And you've applied it to your work. And again, go ahead, Howie. I know you've got some of these questions here, but
No,
just wanted to comment there.
it's a great point to bring out, Lee, and so Becky, I actually want to kind of delve into that a little bit deeper, and I think some of it started with your military training, but certainly the work you've done in the not-for-profit space, and I want to ask you a little bit about that more here in a second, but I really want to bring out this concept because look, as I look at what I would define as a transformational leader, I think of someone like you. You have taken a significant amount of risk in a number of things you've done, and I know you have strong feelings about transformational leadership. So what I think might be helpful too is maybe just define what a transformational leader is to you, and maybe some of the things that someone who wants to make a difference can do to guide and help transformation occur around them.
Yeah. So when I think of transformational leadership as being in contrast to transactional leadership, right? So transactional leadership is you do this, I'll give you that, you'll get a bonus, or it's carrots and sticks. I think transactional leadership is carrots and sticks leadership, and I just have very little interest in that. And there may be time and place for that, but I've yet to really see where that does a lot of good. The transformational leadership, the textbook definition is eluding me at the moment, but the gist of it, I think, is through relationship, through quality time, which is one of the 5 love languages. Through quality time, the leadership is transferred through relationship in such a way that the follower is transformed, that there's a values exchange that can be reciprocal, that there's a modeling, there's an authenticity in it where through the relationship, through the doing together, the follower is a different person on the other side. And I'll say that both from the commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers that I had the privilege of working with in the military, I was the follower in that case, of getting to work for people like Howie, Jan Hicks, work with people like Mark Clifton. you know who was on the side of the transformational leadership with the Mark Clifton, right? I was picking up stuff from him every day, and I hope that I continue to do that with others. And I think that the key is a willingness to invest in quality time with the people who are following you, and a willingness to talk about the underlying values, like what's behind the decision, not what's the right decision, but what's behind the decision and why. Yeah. And I had people willing to do that with me. Yeah.
So Becky, if you don't mind, you bring up Mark Clifton, and I'm hoping actually to get Mark and AC as a duo on this podcast. It's just a matter of locking those guys down. I think they'll have such tremendous value to add to our audience.
We're going to send them this clip, too. We're gonna let them know.
Well, what did AC used to say is like, I thought you were dead.
So for our audience, those of you who may be familiar with the military, each service has a set of values that they espouse. And in the Army, it's based on an acronym for leadership. And as you look at the acronym leadership, the I in leadership is for integrity. And they actually made posters for each of the values. And if you look at the poster for integrity, it's actually a Staff Sergeant Clifton, who was the drill sergeant of the year. And so that's the quality of young men and women I had the privilege to work with when I was still in uniform. But there's the story I really want to share about Mark is, so Becky had already taken command of of Bravo Company 112, and Mark was serving down in we had several detachments geographically placed throughout the world. And Mark was in what at the time was our Panama detachment. And I brought him up and made him the first sergeant, so the senior enlisted officer, senior non-commissioned officer in charge of Bravo Company. So that meant that Becky and Mark would be the command team. And on the first day of Mark serving as the first sergeant of Bravo Company, now I did not physically see this, but I sure heard the stories. He walks into the company headquarters. He takes off his fatigue blouse. He puts on rubber gloves. He takes every cleaning supply that they have in the company. He goes into the company bathroom and he cleans it from the top of the shower down to the toilet. And it is so clean you can literally eat off any part of that bathroom. And his whole point was, if I'm the senior non-commissioned officer in this company, and I'm willing to do this, there is no task in this company that I'm above. So I expect you to do whatever you have to do to get the mission accomplished. And I don't think you could have sent a more pristine, more critical, more poignant message to every man and woman in that company than what First Sergeant Clifton sent that day. And I had the privilege to work with both Becky and Mark. Hey, Becky, I want to shift. You've had well over 18 years of experience working on significant social change efforts in the not-for-profit or nonprofit space, which I find very fascinating in itself. And one of these efforts was finding housing for well over 100,000 folks in about a 4-year time period, and you succeeded, which is a monumental task. So tell us more about this program. And I'd also like you, because some of the folks that are listening, they may not know whether they want to work for a for-profit, a not-for-profit company, or an organization, and maybe just understanding what a not-for-profit organization is, how it works, and how you chose to work in that area. That might be very helpful to some of the folks in our audience.
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with the nonprofit, and we'll include the what this campaign was. So yeah, when you get out of the military, there's you can be a .com, a .edu, a .org, or a .gov. there's only so many choices, and within the .com, you could also hang out a shingle and work for yourself, or you could affiliate yourself with a company. But the main real difference between a nonprofit and the for-profit and the nonprofits or the .orgs is there's two. One is that it's simply a tax status. All it means to be a nonprofit, you're still a company, you're still a corporation, you're organized as such, but the profits, instead of being distributed to shareholders, are reinvested in the purpose of the company. And generally, all companies have a purpose, but generally the purpose of the nonprofit is usually to advance some social benefit in some way. So there's a reinvestment into that. So it doesn't mean they don't have money. There's $1 billion, $1 trillion. There's huge nonprofits that have tons of money. I think that we conflate that with some sort of scarcity. Is 1 out of 10 people in the United States workforce work for a nonprofit. It's a $1 trillion industry, I think, and so massive, right? And so lots of resources. It's a huge part of the economy, doing really big, important things. And the one that I found myself in, which so grateful for that, was working for Roseanne Haggerty and what was then Common Ground, now Breaking Ground, and then I stayed with her as she founded and formed Community Solutions. And just that campaign, just a post note to that. So I worked on, Roseanne hired me to reduce street homelessness by 2/3 in 3 years. And I remember one day telling her, I was like, if you hired the military to do this, they get it done. You may not like it, but they get the job done, And it felt like a contrast to me to the ethos of just, it felt like playing kick the can, in that world. And so injecting that mission accomplishment ethos, I think was why Roseanne hired me, honestly. But I will say that I want to clarify one thing is I definitely didn't house 100,000 people. I coordinated an effort with 186 cities that they did. But a really interesting thing, Roseanne and the people at Community Solutions, they just won the MacArthur $100 million and change prize. They just won a $100 million grant to continue the work that they were continuing after I worked with them. It's the largest prize in philanthropy to advance that work and homelessness completely in, I think, 70 some cities in the United States. So they're just going on to do really impressive things. They probably would be open to hiring veterans. There's big work happening. So yeah, I don't know did that answer your question, or was there another point you wanted me to kind of focus on there?
No, I think that is spot on. But maybe talk a little bit more about the effort, the housing 100,000 homeless. And look, I remember listening to some of your keynote speeches. You used a term called saying housing is healthcare, and I think that's it really stuck with me. And maybe you can kind of explain that a little bit more. The passion you have and the reason you think it's so important to put these homeless people into adequate housing to help them really recover and get a second chance in their life.
Yeah. So thank you for that clarification. When I first started working on homelessness in 2003, my mental model was, I guess I probably just need to help these people get a job, because that's I don't know. That's the stories that I had consumed through whatever media or educational materials. And while certainly almost everybody I met on the streets wanted a job and wanted to find productive, meaningful work, the first thing that comes, and Dr. Sam Sambaris invented this concept, is housing first, is that we worry about the housing first, because there's no way, just imagine, that you could probably do all right in a tent for a little while, but after a while, what starts to happen, especially if you don't feel safe, is your mental health and your cognitive capacities really take a big hit. And homelessness is veterans are disproportionately in many cases impacted by homelessness.
That's true.
And so
Very
we got
true.
to look out for our brothers and sisters there. And when you're in that state for a long period of time, and I can't speak about it from first experience, but there's this deleterious impact on your health that's just undeniable. And that what we found from working with a doctor, Jim O'Connell in Boston, that certain health conditions, when paired with homelessness, puts you on a mortality risk on par with some forms of cancer. That homelessness is actually a lethal. It enhances your likelihood for a premature death. I think the average age of people who are homeless when they die is 55. I mean, it takes decades off your life. And so when I started seeing homelessness as a public health emergency, my approach changed. It wasn't like, oh, let's give someone some socks, or that was never my approach, but that was some people's approach. Or let's help it be more comfortable, which is sort of more palliative care, because they're going to die soon. It was more like, hey, let's change this situation, and that the housing is in fact a health intervention. And for people who work in healthcare, I think it's well known that they talk about determinants of health, that there's all these things that make us healthy that have nothing to do with going to the doctors. It's how we eat and our access to healthy food, and if we exercise, and if we have our environments and all those things. So housing is absolutely a powerful leverage point in terms of health, our health and well-being. And I think that's the people who are doing some of the more cutting edge work really see housing as a public health intervention.
Yeah, I mean, the physical transformation that some of these folks, I remember seeing you posted some pictures of some of the folks that when you pulled them off the street, and then after even just a couple weeks in housing, the physical transformation was just absolutely staggering. And maybe that's something that we could also put links to some of these keynote speeches in our show notes if we go that route. For anybody who has more interest in that, I really encourage you to see what Becky has done in this area. I think it's just, again, it is transformational. And I know I personally appreciate your commitment to this and the success that you had and the changes you've literally changed people's lives and helped them get a second chance in their life. I just think that's awesome.
One of the things I love about doing this show with Howie, Becky, is that, in addition to hearing the stories of transition out of the military and what we've done, we get to hear the great work that people are doing, right? The transformational work, if you will, that people are doing. And it's incredibly inspiring. And just hearing you talk about the work there inspired me, right? So as Howie said, just echoing him, I hope the audience, if you do take some interest in that, we'll put some links with the episode. We are going to continue here on this episode of This Is Your Life. We've been through the military. We've been through some of the work you did outside of the military, but that brings us to the modern times. And you started the Billions Institute and co-founded the Social Change Agency. So some of our listeners may be interested in how you took that next step from working for other organizations to creating your own organization. So I do want to hear a little bit, obviously, about what the Billion Institute does, please, and then how you decided to start that organization, excuse me, and then the steps you took to do it, so as maybe a roadmap for some of the listeners.
Yeah, I think personally, I think the U.S. tax code is pretty clear that it's in favor of people being small business owners. And so if you've got a little sparkle in your eye about something you want to do, there's wind in your sails, right? In terms of the co-founding of the Billions Institute, the history of in 2009, when we were making some traction on street homelessness, Roseanne introduced me to Don Berwick and Joe McCannon at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And so this connection between healthcare and housing was cemented early on for me. And Joe was someone who had led a campaign to get thousands of hospitals to change their practices so they didn't accidentally kill people to the amount they were. He led a campaign to prevent 100,000 preventable deaths in his young 20s. And then he was my mentor. They seconded Joe to help me design and then run the 100,000 Homes campaign, which was modeled off of the bones, I guess, of what he had done, but in healthcare as a transition to that. So Joe and I, we were friends immediately, recognized one another as kindred spirits all the way back in 2009. He went to go work for the Obama administration. He stood up the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation and did a lot with the rollout of Obamacare, which was really large-scale change from a governmental perspective, while I ran the 100,000 Homes campaign. Towards the end of the 100,000 Homes campaign, a couple months left, I got an email from the people who run the TED Prize. And I don't know if you know the TED Prize, but it's, hey, give us your wish for the world in 50 words or less, and if we like your wish, if we like yours the best, we'll give you $1 million to get going. I thought it was a practical joke from my colleagues. I thought they had gotten some Gmail address. I was like, very funny, you guys. Well, it turns out I really was a finalist for the TED Prize. And so I had to come up with a wish for the world for 50 words or less. And I called, they said, you can call your friends, don't put it on social media, but you call your friends. First phone call was to Roseanne, second was to Joe. And I was like, Joe, you know they're going to want me to do something on homelessness, but I really want to help people in all sectors learn how to do change. And he's like, yeah, you're probably not going to get the TED Prize for that. And I was like, well, what do you want to do? And Joe had all these great, wonderful ideas of what he wanted to do, and I had the ideas of what I wanted to do. And that night I went home and I told my partner, I was like, I don't think I'm going to win the TED Prize, but I definitely want to work with Joe. And the next day I called him and said, hey, you want to go into business together? And Joe was like, I was thinking the exact same thing. So that's how the Billions Institute got co-founded. And literally, and this is I don't know if this is luck or white privilege, but Joe came over. He was in LA. He lives in Boston. We met in our living room, basically, and we did this exercise called Rockin' Beginnings, developed by my friend Janet Parks. And the first question is, what's your high dream for what we might do together? And Joe was like, I don't know, maybe in the next 20 years help solve some of the world's biggest problems. And boom, we had a purpose.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, and the rest has continued. But I guess if you're thinking about starting a business, I would highly encourage that. Peter Drucker has this quote that the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. And I get it. But I think the purpose of a business really is to express your genius in the world in the least encumbered, most frictionless way, so that you can be of service.
I love that.
So and that you will be able to find some market exchange that's going to help you go if it's a good business idea. But it's about the unoccluded expression of your genius and being of service. And a business is a great vehicle to do that.
That is a beautiful way of looking at it. I always love the question about creating your own business, and we get some really great answers. We've had a few business owners on the show. But the echo that I hear here is, and this goes right back to the military, is you serve the people that you're involved with, whether that's your employees or your customers, right? I never liked looking at the people that interact with my business as just customers. Yes, baseline, that's what they are. But they're not dollar signs to me. These are people loyal to my brand, to my purpose, and I want them to feel like they're part of that. And Becky, I'm sure you'd agree. Please tell me if you don't. But I can almost guarantee that if you approach a business with that mentality, you are going to succeed. as long as you have the right infrastructure set up. I mean, you agree with that, right?
I do, and I was rereading this Brian Tracy book, which Howie turned me on to Brian Tracy in the '90s about, but most businesses that
we don't have to
succeed,
date it. You don't have to date Howie like that. That's
Hey, I'm an old man. I admit it. Just look at me.
Yes.
We're all in the old people club. But the most businesses that do ultimately succeed aren't doing the thing they were doing when they started, right? And so there's this constant, and it is through the attunement, through relationship to your customers of what do you need so that you can best serve them, I think. That is what supports the endurance of the company.
And then one more thing, Howie, if I may.
Sure.
Something you're making me think about, Becky. And I actually didn't realize this until I started doing international commerce and speaking with people in other countries. But if you are a veteran that would like to explore entrepreneurship or starting a business, our country makes it incredibly easy to start a business compared to other countries in terms of the time it takes, the amount of money it takes, and really the red tape you have to walk through to do it. You could, in essence, have a business up and running in terms of the paperwork within 24 hours, which is really unheard of. And if you're a veteran, there are so many programs, even Howie has explained this to me, to support you, that if it's something in your mind, because I've been thinking about this with our audience, if it's something, it's a lot to do, it's too much to do, if you're passionate enough about what you want to do and you have the right pieces in place, it is not hard to create it. It might be hard to move forward from that point, but in order to create it, it is not hard to do.
I agree. I think everyone should have a business just as a side hustle. And that's the social change agency. I was like, oh yeah, we did that, but it was just a side hustle. But you could also, I mean, not to like totally get like nerd out as an accountant, but you can legitimately run expenses through it. There's just ways that you can optimize the resources you have towards the purpose that you want them to go towards. And the business is a vehicle for that. It's also a vehicle for providing the opportunity for others to experience right livelihood, which there's to me, there's a spiritual dimension to that can I support others in experiencing right livelihood and myself as well, right? And if things go wrong, like, I only have myself to blame. So I'm a big fan of the small business for sure. Yeah.
Becky, we're going to have to make another book for you called Side Hustle Saves Lives.
That's right. Lee's great at coming up with book titles for our podcast guests. So now he just has to be their co-author to get them to write it.
That's going to be my shtick on this show. That's the guy that makes the book titles.
That's right. This is about the third time he's offered a book title on our podcast. So
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So Becky, one of the pieces of value that we hope to offer to our audience is not just for the military veteran who's going through the transition, but to flip the coin to the organization or the company or the corporate environment. If they are hiring military veterans into their organizations, what can they do to receive that vet into their organization, help them adjust to their culture? So one is that I'd like you to talk about is how was that done for you? And look, it may have been things that were done well, maybe things that weren't done well, and both are very important experiences to share. But how were you welcomed into the climate and culture of the organizations you chose to work with after you got out of the military? And what advice would you give to, again, organization leaders, owners, whatever, to better transition military into their organizations?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and it is different. The civilian world is, as you know, very different, right? A couple things. So what support I received? So my first job was as a stockbroker, and that's a very sort of individualistic type of profession. There are people who form groups and teams with financial planners and the insurance and things like that, right, where they can do holistic financial planning. But the firm that I went to, it was a very reputable firm. I have tremendous respect for it. There was no pressure or anything weird like that. But I was kind of on my own, and I had an office just kind of by myself with no windows, and I didn't stay there long. And but the person who was my boss was a veteran as well, and it was the onboarding he provided was really just through quality time again, right? There wasn't anything super fancy. But when I went to what was then Common Ground and worked for Roseanne Haggerty, I experienced again, the joy of camaraderie and community and a sense of solidarity that felt familiar to the military sense of service and purpose and mission. And that was communicated through retreats, senior leadership retreats, through social outings with my peers and colleagues, that even though I think sometimes as someone who's like serious and wants to get the job done, the goof off time can seem like frivolous, but actually I think it's really powerful for forming those secondary ties and those loose ties that support the work and getting done really well through real mentorship and quality time together. And so it was really through one-on-one time that I learned kind of the way things worked. But I will say the way things work is really differently. Like, so I think I don't know if let me take a time out. So you want to know for like, what did I receive, but what advice would I give a company for how to help a vet on board?
Sure.
Okay. So I would tell them the things that nobody told me. So maybe this is more directly to the vets, but there's no NCOs in the civilian sector, which is kind of how I got by, right? Like, I think like the non-commissioned officers in the military take a tremendous amount of pride, rightfully so, in that they actually do the work. And so, and there's this division of labor among the commissioned and the non-commissioned corps that, in the civilian world, everybody's kind of got to do everything, especially in the nonprofits in some ways, right? And so, in the military, I was always paired with a non-commissioned officer, and we could play good cop, bad cop. We could do all kinds of stuff, right? There's nobody do that with in the civilian world, and so it took me like a year or two where I was like, oh my God, I don't have an NCO to work with. And that's an adjustment in and of itself. So be prepared. But you can replace that, I think, through close relationships with your colleagues, right? To invest in those relationships. The biggest difference for me, the hardest lessons learned, was in the military. The full ethos is retention. You've got a soldier who's overweight, who's not passing the PT test, who can't shoot the broadside of a barn. You know what I mean? It's your job to help that soldier lose weight so that they can stay in the military and they can serve, right? And so there's this extreme, I think, emphasis on retention and remediative work, right? So I took that ethos into the civilian sector, where I was like, nobody's going to get fired on my watch. No, in the civilian world, we fire people, and it's okay, and it's what happens. And so part of what I needed to learn how to do, and I would suggest you teach veterans how to do and how to do well, is to know when to fire someone and how to do so compassionately and gracefully. And that is part of the churn of the civilian sector in a different way. And what I was doing is I was holding on to people who actually weren't well suited for the work, and it was cruel to them too, right? Because because I had in my mind, my job is to keep them in there. So I think, I don't know, I have one or two more, but I want to see if you two was I the only one?
No, you're not the only one that experienced that. I can tell you that my wife experienced that on the way out. And, one of the conversations that she and I have often is, it's actually almost a little bit reversed from what you said, is I remember early on after her transition in the military, she would say, well, what if I don't like it? What if I don't fit in? And I go, then you can quit. And the thing is that, and I admire her for this, but like that was not an option in her own mind,
right.
Because the military had taught her that, right? Now, with that said, there's nothing wrong with I shouldn't say quit, but there's nothing wrong with resigning from a job that you don't fit in and that you don't enjoy and that you don't want to do. Yeah. But I remember Becky is telling her that, and the look on her face of like, that wasn't even an option. I didn't even think of that. And I just think that it's such an admirable quality. Of that, you said this several times on the show, that like that never die, never give up attitude. Mm-hmm. But what I think people transitioning need to understand, and the businesses need to understand, is how big of an asset that can be for your business. When you have someone that is willing to die, quote unquote, for your business, you need to utilize that person the best possible way, right? And really make them feel like they're part of it. To your other point of, being paired with somebody. I have a veteran that works for me, and I constantly, as often as I can, try and go down and just talk with him about his day, his family. He's got a newborn. Can I assist you with anything? Going back to Howie, your story about doing the cleaning the bathroom, like I know how to do his job because I wanted to know how to do his job. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm saying is that he knows I know how to do it, and we're a team, right? From the CEO down to his level, we're a team. I don't look at it like that, but just again, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit here, but yes, you can resign from a position you don't like. In the military, it doesn't work that way because your education might go with it. You know what I mean? So, but yes, you're not the only one that has mentioned something like that.
And how to let someone go gracefully, I think, is not something people know inherently. And because like when I first was in a situation where the obvious answer was to let someone go, I felt so much internalized shame myself. I was like, they're going to feel so ashamed about this. Meanwhile, they were like, yeah, this sucks. I'm out of here. Like I was really doing them a favor, but like I held myself back from doing it for so long, to the detriment of the mission and the company, because I was like feeling their shame for them that they weren't feeling, like, because I thought this was bad, but it can actually be a really positive outcome when it's just not a fit. That's just, it's not a fit. It's okay. It's not personal. It's not bad feelings,
if I may, real quick on that one too, giving the job side of this, right? The non-military guy side of this. I learned how to let people go when I was coaching college hockey. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning when you have to cut players that really worked hard to be on your team.
Oh yeah.
I really learned how to have to tell somebody you're not on the team, and that really prepared me for having to let people go in the civilian world. And what I typically do, again, for any employer out there, is I turn my emotions off. That's something you have to do. All right. Yeah. Like it's never going to be comfortable. So I kind of just turn my emotions down, I should say, not off. Right. Mm-hmm. I explain what's happening, why it's happening, make sure that I give them, whether it's good or bad, the reasons of why it's happening. And then I often try and offer help. And like, do you need help finding a direction to look for another job? What are the things that this is going to impact you? How can I help escort you to that next place that you need to go? Without sacrificing, obviously, myself or the organization. That's not something a lot of people provide. It's usually just, you're terminated, goodbye, right? Yeah. And don't get me wrong, and Becky, you know this. You might offer help to someone, and they might tell you an expletive and leave the office, and that's not unheard of, right? But, like you said, I need to feel like I'm in the position of, look, I'm doing this the right way for me and the company that goes along with the ideals that I have, and that's the process, right? But hey, listen, it's your last day today. That's not usually. I've had that happen before. Today's your last day. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. It's horrible. And I think a mentor of mine once shared with me that if, as the owner, if I decide to let someone go, and they were showing up and at least doing their best and trying in good faith, this consultant really put on my shoulders like, hey, you're the one who changed your mind. You're the one who changed your agreement. You got to make sure they're set up. You can't, if you cause financial harm to them, that's on you. And I was like, oh man, I never thought about that. And so that I do have a commitment to do no harm as long as there's good faith and it's not a fit. That's on me. I think there's some corporations that have, I think, extraordinary. They're like, hey, we're gonna. I think what Netflix comes to mind, where no harm, no foul. Like, come try it out. No harm, no foul. And we'll be really generous to you on the way out, but we want people who are going to swing for the fences. So, some cool stuff out there. The last thing I'll just share is to tell your vet that it's okay to ask for additional resources. So that I had I had a little bit of a time in the stockbroker, but not substantial. But I went straight from the military to a nonprofit, and I assumed because I was in a nonprofit that there would be scarcity. That because we have these stories about there's not enough resources, and I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. So I kept taking on more responsibility. Like I'll do it because I care, and like stick it in my ruck, and I'll just keep going. And at any given time, I could have said, an assistant would really be helpful, or could I have a little extra money for such and such? And we probably could have worked it out, but I didn't know, because in the military, I think our budgets are just kind of fixed. You just got what you got. You run out of bullets,
Right.
you go home from the
Right.
range. You like whatever food there is. That's why the officer eat last. And so it's not that way in the civilian world. It's not necessarily fixed resources. Sometimes we have constraints, but I just thought that my job was to make the best of what I had. It never
Right.
occurred to me that I could ask for more. And you can. You absolutely can.
That's a great tip. That's a great tip for employers, because I can tell you right now, employers don't think that people are selfless in the way that you're talking about, especially out of the military. With the same employee I was referencing a moment ago, I remember we were talking about rebuilding an area. And to his credit, he was always looking for the most cost-efficient way. And I said, well, we can just buy this and this and that. And he goes, we can? Yeah. He was shocked that I'd offered it. I'm like, yeah, man, we have some money. That's the whole point. Yeah, we're a business. So I think that's a great point. And because you're proving it right. Like, he didn't even think to ask, do we have a budget for that? So
yeah,
great stuff.
I have to remind myself as a business owner to spend money, and to remind my colleagues.
Right.
I'm like, go shopping. Like, what do you need? What do you need? Professional development. What do you need to do stuff? And they're like,
Right.
oh, I found something really cheap. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be. Like, let's do right. Let's do right by you and by each other. Yeah.
Absolutely. Howard, did you have the next question, or did I have the next question?
Well, I'm happy to. So I think we'll probably the last question, and maybe the most interesting one for our audience, given that Pivotal Moments, as an overall organization, is seeking to strengthen mental fitness worldwide. Becky, how do you personally define? I'm not looking for a book, a textbook definition, but how do you personally?
But you'll get a title. I'll give you a title for that book.
I'll take
if you need a title. Yeah, no, go ahead, Howard.
But how do you personally define mental fitness? And maybe you can share with the audience some of the things you do to strengthen your own mental fitness.
That's great. Hey, and are y'all hearing feedback? Is that?
Yeah, I apologize. I think I've got our lawn care service outside my house right now, and
it's a live show.
That might be
a live show.
Yeah, they obviously didn't get the memo that we were recording this podcast right now.
Okay, that's cool. So they'll tune that out or whatever. Okay. Mine's coming soon, so mine won't be here. I told mine to wait till 10:30. Okay, so we're good. So how do I define mental fitness, and what do I do for my own mental fitness? Okay. By the way, I just want to say I really love that as a purpose. I think, and even just as a name, it's very catchy. It should be a book title. I'm sure there are many book titles in there. So when I think of mental fitness, as separate from physical fitness or emotional fitness, that what comes to me is the ability to by choice decide where I'm going to put my energy and attention. That I'm able I can lift and shift where I'm putting my attention, and that I can lift and shift the story I'm making up about an event, because we're all just making up stories all the time and giving things meaning that they don't necessarily have. They're just, everything that happens is neutral. So one of my things I live by is everything that happens is feedback, and everyone is my ally. Even if they look like my enemy, everyone is my ally. And then how can we get moving on making the world a better place? And so just this, the ability to catch yourself in a spiral that's going in a non-creative direction, in a non-productive direction, and then bring yourself back with a new story to a new state of being, because I really do think we create our state of being. And emotions fit in, and our wellness in our bodies fits into all this as well. But specifically the ability to shift my attention, which, by the way, ain't nothing. that's like super intense work to be able to do that. It's taken me years to be able to do that 10% of the time. I mean, and so, but that's how I think of it, and it's something I strive for. So you're curious, how do I give myself mental fitness? How do I attend to it? How do I work out at the mental fitness gym?
Exactly.
I do a bunch of stuff to tend to my own mental well-being. I think the first thing is every year, how you're going to chuckle. Every year, my partner and I do an exercise on New Year's Eve, because you want to party with us, where we go through some of the questions that I read in the Brian Tracy book that you made us read in 95, 96. And it's questions like, what would you do if you won the lottery? What would you do if you found out you only had 6 months to live? Those types of purpose aligned questions. So I have the hard copies going back to 2000 of my answers to those questions.
Really?
And so that has been, so I have this foundation of at least once a year giving myself a tune-up. And the cool thing is most of those things that in 2000 I thought were just bananas, that there's no way, they've all come true.
No kidding.
It's all come true. It's all come beyond my wildest expectations. And stuff that I'll do like I'm like, oh, I didn't do that for 8 years later. It's like I said it and then I forget it. And then 8 years later, I'm like, oh, I did that thing that back in 2004 was just a crazy idea. So I think that's the foundation for me, is just kind of coming back home to alignment with what's coming through me, I think. I also then every day, I read myself a reminder of who I am. It's a mindset check of who I am, what I'm about, what my values are, why I'm here. And there's this great thing, I learned this from a business coach that I have, of the way it's phrased is I am this, like this is who I am, as a reminder. And without me, my family has this experience. With me, my family has that experience. Without me, social change leaders have this, but with me, they have that. So I'm just teeing up what I'm here to do every single day. And then every night I end with an appreciation. I look for something that I'm really grateful for. I've been making a word cloud of the things that I'm grateful for. And that's part of my practice as well. And then I think that the main things that I do, probably I have like a list of 10, but let me just share I think the most powerful thing that I do to support my own mental fitness is when I'm feeling the grr, when I'm feeling stuck, when I'm feeling like life just, handed me one, I have the presence of mind eventually, and sooner rather than later, I'm getting quicker and quicker at it. I'm taking it in, I'm facing what's happening, being with what is, and then I'm shifting my attention to what can I appreciate right now. So I'm shifting my attention to appreciation. So I'll give you an example. I'm the oldest of 7. I feel very protective of my siblings. One of my siblings is struggling, and in a way that I feel personally irritated with him as well. and I was grousing about that and gnashing my teeth and like feeling upset about that. But all the rest of my siblings have come together to support that sibling. So I have that choice. I can pay attention to how irritating one of my siblings is being to me right now, right? Or I can put my attention on all the rest of my siblings coming together to show up with each other on their behalf. And so it's literally in those micro moments when I decide, because I could go down that rabbit hole. Like if you ever want someone to complain with, like I'm really good at that, or to figure out whose fault it is. I'm like, I've got an A+ in that in school, right? But the shifting of my attention the other way, that is where my mental fitness lies, is in the noticing and then the commitment to do it. Because you get adrenaline when you go down this pathway, which is addictive and not creative, but at least you get to feel self-righteous. But on this one, you get the oxytocin, you get the feel good stuff. And so I think that key shift is where if I have any mental fitness whatsoever, it comes from that. And that is as a daily slog to do that.
Right. Becky, I think it's important to note for the listeners too, that, we're living in a world right now with a media landscape that is just constantly, and I'm not just talking media on the TV, I'm talking all of it. Anywhere there's a screen is just spewing negative news. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying some of this stuff doesn't need to be reported. But what I am saying is that there is an incredible amount of positive, good news, people really doing change like yourself, right, out there. And it can be hard sometimes to get out of the funnel that we sink in oftentimes of negativity. And one thing I want to impress to the audience is that to change, to do that is a choice. And this is what I always say. The choice to make the change is actually quite easy once you arrive there. But getting to the moment of that choice something you've experienced multiple times in your life, is very hard, right? It's a journey kind of to the center of the earth, if you will. But once you get there and you realize it, you go, no, I'm changing this now. And you do. It is that simple, right? Another thing, too, is you spoke about is just the power of the present moment and being in the present moment. You know, there's a great quote about, tell me the biggest problem right now in this moment, right? And there usually isn't one. And the quote continues, if there is one, it's probably a real problem. But there usually isn't a problem. You know, this conversation, this podcast is my life at this moment. Love my children, love my wife, love my family. But this is reality right now. Yeah. And so often people get lost in the past or they get lost in the future of their lives. Just focus on where you're at this second if you're listening to this podcast, you know. And the last thing I want to comment on, Becky, in this, you know, just to further prove your point, you know, we've spoken, again, many people on this podcast. Every one of them, every successful person, and how you've been here for every one of them, they have something that they do. They have something that they do. We had one person who does a vision board. You have a notebook where you keep your goals every year. I think there's this stigma when it comes to mental fitness, or even a saboteur in the brain that goes like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that, right? Well, we're telling you that every successful person that we know does something like that, right? They get over that voice in their head that says, I don't need to do that, right? You do. You know what I mean? We all do. We all need to do something like that, you know, so break that stigma, jump over the hurdle, and find whatever works for you. It's going to be something different for every person. But statistically proven that if you write out your goals or you do something like that, statistically proven, you have a far more positive chance of accomplishing those goals than if you don't. That has been researched. It is well known. And you have done that many times over. I want to make sure that I give you the last word. I did just riff there for a few minutes. No book titles in that one, but I did talk for a minute there. So any last thoughts on that?
No, I think you nailed it. That's where it's at. And
right.
And I just want to express in my mental fitness appreciation for Howie for modeling that and for being the kind of leader that I was. I was always like, what's he up to? And curious of what he was doing. and we would joke around and call him the touchy-feely ranger because I mean, he's a ranger. This guy's a ranger. This doesn't get more tougher. Yeah. Like, what is it? He like eats nails and poops rust, you know? I mean, this guy's as tough as it gets. And he was having us read these like self-improvement books. and thank you. I don't thank you enough, Howie. And like so much that has happened in my life has come from the influence that you've had on me, and we don't get to go back and thank people enough either. So I'm just forever grateful for having the opportunity to have
you're way too kind, and you're absolutely giving me way too much credit, Becky. What you've accomplished in your life is because of the type of person you are, and I just want to thank you personally, professionally, on behalf of myself, Lee, and the folks at Charlie, Mike, and Pivotal Moments for accepting our invitation to be on this podcast. It's been exceptional. I think this is actually, and you know, it's interesting. I think this is actually the longest one we've done, and it's the one that's gone so quickly. I cannot believe that we've gone through this that quickly. I hope that our audience gets as much much value out of this as I did, and I just thank you for sharing your experiences and stories with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope this helps a lot of veterans. And I'll ask, can I say one more thing? Don't stop doing PT. Yeah. Don't stop doing PT. It's way easier to stay in shape than it is to get in shape.
That is
That's our next show. It's PT with Howie and Lee on Pivotal Moments. Becky, I want to thank you so much for being on today. You've been a gift, and you've also given me the gift of calling Howie the touchy-feely ranger from now on. That's how I'll be introducing him on the show moving forward. And he won't give you credit for that either. No, I'm just kidding. This has been wonderful.
I think that was Brett Reister. I think Brett Reister said that.
He says it's you. You say it's him. I probably need to get the two of you together, and we'll figure this one out.
Prisoner's dilemma.
Change the show name to the Touchy Feely Ranger. No, we won't do that. But I will say that you've been listening to Crossing the LD, which is powered by the nonprofit Pivotal Moments, and you can learn more about the organization at pivotalmoments.org for inspirational content, education, or if you'd like to donate. For Becky Margiotta, Howie Cohen, the Touchy Feely Ranger, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure to keep an eye out for more episodes soon wherever podcasts can be heard. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.